A love whispered in silence, the suppressed romance of Sukiya and Song Tan-yun. In the quiet, windswept provinces of southern Jiangxi, where the peach blossoms blush and fall like unspoken promises, lived two souls whose love defied the tide of tradition, politics, and time itself. This is not a tale often told aloud. It lives in the spaces between words, in the pauses between glances, in the tremble of a hand that never dares to reach out. This is the story of Sukiya and Song Tan-yun, two hearts that beat in silence, forever haunted by the love they could never claim. An unlikely meeting in the spring of revolution. Sukiya was born to a family of scholars, steeped in generations of Confucian values and dignity. A quiet man with thoughtful eyes and an intellect that shimmered beneath his modest demeanor, Su was destined for a life of state service. His poetry, however, secret and smudged in the margins of his textbooks, betrayed a heart that longed for more than obedience. Song Tan-yun, in contrast, was a force of nature. The daughter of a merchant turned revolutionary, she was brilliant, unrelenting, and unapologetically radical. Where Sukiya whispered, Tan-yun roared. She believed in the red dawn of change, in a world where women stood as equals and voices were not stifled by class or gender. They met at a provincial university in 1937, in the early stirrings of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Sukiya, hesitant and thoughtful, attended a lecture on literature and propaganda, more for the poetry than the politics. Tan-yun was the guest speaker. Her voice carried across the lecture hall like thunder on a summer night. From that moment, Sukiya was never quite the same. Love in the shadows of conflict. War has a way of accelerating everything: youth, death, decisions, and love. What might have been a gentle courtship in more peaceful times became something electric, magnetic, and dangerous. They found excuses to meet, under the ginkgo trees by the campus library, during volunteer shifts in makeshift hospitals, through letters slipped beneath textbooks and translated into poetry. Their love blossomed not in defiance of war, but in tandem with it. Every kiss was a rebellion. Every touch was a secret kept from a world that would not forgive them. But while their souls intertwined, their paths diverged. Sukiya's family, wary of Song Tan-yun's revolutionary affiliations, forbade the relationship. His father, a loyal servant to the Kuomintang, warned him, "That woman will not only ruin your name, she will bury your future." Song Tan-yun, too, faced pressure. Her comrades whispered about Sukiya's bourgeois softness, accusing her of compromising the cause for the comfort of a man who did not fight as fiercely as she did. The turning point, a letter that never reached. In 1941, with the war intensifying, Song Tan-yun left to join the underground resistance in Shanghai. Sukiya, bound by familial duty and fear, stayed behind. She wrote to him one final, trembling letter full of longing, rage, and hope. In it, she asked him to come with her, to shed his obligations and run toward a future they could build on their own terms. He never received it. The letter was intercepted by Su's uncle, who burned it and sent his nephew to a government post in Nanjing. Sukiya, believing she had chosen her cause over their love, buried himself in work and silence. Song Tan-yun, believing she had been rejected, never wrote again. The unwritten years. Decades passed. Regimes rose and fell. Sukiya published a few volumes of poetry under a pen name, each one echoing with the ache of someone who once held lightning and let it go. Song Tan-yun survived the war, was imprisoned during the Cultural Revolution, and later became a quiet advocate for women's rights in the 1980s. She never married. Some loves, she once said in a rare interview, do not need a wedding to be real. Some hearts are married in silence. They never saw each other again. A postscript in the age of memory. In 2002, long after both had passed, Su in a quiet hospital room in Suzhou, Tan-yun in her sleep in a modest Beijing apartment. A box was found beneath Sukiya's bed. Inside, a stack of yellowed poems, a photograph of Tan-yun holding a red notebook, and an unopened envelope charred slightly along the edges. It was her letter. It had never been completely destroyed. A literature professor later published a selection of Sukiya's poems under the title Letters Never Sent. The final stanza reads, "I never heard you say goodbye. Only the rustle of paper, the hush of smoke. If silence could hold hands, ours would still be clasped." Legacy of a quiet rebellion. The story of Sukiya and Song Tanyun is not one of triumph. It is not the love story that ends in reunion, in redemption, or even in resolution. It is a love that lived where no one saw, in footnotes, in censored lines, in unsent letters and ashes. But that, perhaps, is where the truest loves often live. Their romance, suppressed, silenced, and smothered, remains not as a tale of sorrow, but as a quiet rebellion against a world that demanded they choose between love and loyalty, between each other and the world. They chose each other, even if only in silence. Echoes from the Ashes. A discovery in Suzhou. It began with a dusty footnote. In the spring of 2012, a graduate student named Lin Meiyun was researching wartime literature for her thesis at Suzhou University when she stumbled upon a passing reference to a poet known only as KX, whose verses had once stirred the literary underground in the 1950s. The poems were unsigned, cryptic, and strangely intimate allusions to a war, a woman, and a wound that never healed. Meiyun, intrigued by the raw emotion in the texts, followed the trail of fragments, old anthologies, blacklisted pamphlets, marginalia in public archives until she found a name barely legible on the inside flap of an unpublished manuscript, Sukiya. The poems were real. The pain was real. And so was the woman whose name appeared again and again in different forms, Yun, St., her with the red notebook. Tanyun's forgotten archive. With support from her professor, Meiyun tracked down the last known residence of Song Tanyun in a quiet lane near Beijing's Songwankan district. It was being cleared for redevelopment. Among the cracked tiles and faded wallpaper, she found a box of photographs, clippings, and handwritten journals beneath a loose floorboard. Inside one of the journals, Tanyun had written in her aged, deliberate hand, "We fought wars in the open, but the war of love, we fought underground, without maps, without allies. Only the silence knew our names." There were no public memorials to Tanyun, no plaques, no streets named after her. But her voice, buried in poetry and resistance, had survived like a ghost that refused to fade. Letters reunited. Meiyun began piecing together the story, painstakingly comparing the final poems of Sukiya with Tanyun's journal entries. The symmetry was undeniable. Even across decades, even across silence, they spoke the same language of longing, of betrayal, of fidelity not to society, but to the soul. She published her thesis as a book, A War Without Witnesses, the suppressed love of Sukiya and Song Tanyun, and it rippled across China's literary scene like a long-delayed confession. For the first time, readers saw them not as a scholar and a radical, but as human fragile, furious, bound by invisible threads that time could not unravel. Love letters on stage. In 2016, the story was adapted into a stage play titled Whispers and Smoke, performed in Shanghai and later in Taipei. The final active fictional scene where Tanyun and Sukiya meet in an imagined afterlife, beneath the magnolia tree, left audiences in tears night after night. They do not speak in the scene. They simply sit beside each other, eyes closed, and hold hands. Behind them, a recording plays Sukiya's final poem in his own trembling voice, a recording discovered in a forgotten archive of Suzhou's public radio, dated just 3 weeks before his death. Let no one say we didn't love. We loved like prisoners digging tunnels, quietly, desperately, toward a light we never saw. A legacy in bloom. Today, in the southern courtyard of the Suzhou Cultural Center, a magnolia tree grows beside a bronze plaque. It does not bear their names. It simply reads, "For those who loved in silence. For those who were never allowed to choose." Each spring, white petals fall like letters never sent, and students come to sit beneath the tree, some reading poetry, others simply listening to the wind. Some say the air smells faintly of old paper and jasmine. Some say if you close your eyes, you can almost hear a whisper. Sukiya. I waited. Tanyun. I know.